Hello and welcome to my channel. Gene Kelly is going to be my portrait today. He was an American actor, singer, dancer, mostly known for musicals. Colored pencils on sanded paper. Let's get to it. So this is another colored pencil portrait in a series that I'm doing. This actor was best known for his musicals Singing in the Rain, An American in Paris, and some others. And it's going to be the same size as the previous portraits, the same materials. I'm not going to go into that too much. I'm going to go straight into the drawing process. So as for the background, I'm going to use some dull grayish tones. There's going to be some brownish and greenish tones in addition to the dark grey. But here I first did the edge of the face on the left with that cinnamon colored pencil that I'm going to use for the face. So on this left side I used a little bit of that raw umber, and on top of that I used a bit of this green. This is, I believe, a juniper green. Just mix that in there. And in case you're wondering why I'm covering this so carelessly, that's because I'm going to be blending it, and on sandpaper it's easier to move the pigment around, to move the material around with brushes and other blending tools. On top I put some black colored pencil, and I even mixed in some of the cinnamon and some other tones that I'm going to be using on the face. So a combination of colors, but mostly a dark grayish background with a few greenish elements to it, and I'm just blending that before I move on with my main subject. The drawing itself is based on a photo reference that was colorized, so I don't know how realistic the colors will be, and I'm not particularly concerned with that because I always make some adjustments to the colors, especially the background and the overall atmosphere. Now, as you can see, I did a bit of blending with a brush to get that to look smoother. And like I said, this is something that you can only do on sanded paper because it's a bit easier to move that color around. You can't really do that on regular paper because the regular paper doesn't really grind on the pencils quite as much, so it doesn't leave that residue on top that you can move around. Anyway, here I'm doing the hair using mostly a black colored pencil for now, leaving a little bit of those spaces in between for the highlights because his hair is slicked back, and I'm going to be drawing some highlights at the top, maybe a few of them at the side, but the side is mostly going to appear darker. The side parting here is on the right side. It's going to be barely visible, but the hair is slicked back and to the left, or his right, if you will. I'm going to add just a touch of brown here and there, and then for the highlights I'm going to use a lighter colored pencil. I'm going to use a little bit of this cinnamon just to stay consistent with the overall colors and the overall atmosphere of the photo. Maybe a touch of green here and there as well, but mostly black because he had dark hair. So now I'm going to move on with the eyes. I should say a few more words about the materials just in case you haven't watched any of the previous videos. The colored pencils I'm using are Faber Castell Polychromos. Those are the ones that I like to use most of the time, and the surface is waterproof sandpaper, 1000 grit sandpaper. It's the stuff that you can buy in any hardware store. So I don't use very expensive materials. Faber Castell Polychromos are pretty decent quality colored pencils, some of the best I believe, but other than that I mostly use cheaper stuff. Now, as you can see, I started working a little bit on the skin tone around the eyes. I forgot to say a few words about the eyes. So The catch light in the eye, I left the space for that and then filled it in with some white colored pencil because I wanted to stand out. The rest of the iris around it is pitch black, so I have a nice contrast there. And he had dark eyes, so I just mostly used black for it. For the rest of the eyeball I used mostly a combination of light grey and some ivory colored pencil, and even a touch of the cinnamon around the corners. And now I'm using that cinnamon colored pencil for most of the skin, for most of the face. Of course, that's not the only thing that I'm going to be using. For some of the darker parts and the wrinkles, I'm going to use some brownish colored pencils. Like for example here I used a little bit of burnt sienna. And on top of that, for some of the lighter parts of the skin, because this left side of the face is the light side, it's facing towards the light source. For the lighter portions I'm going to use this light beige red, which is even lighter than the cinnamon. It's kind of like a light pinkish color. And I'm going to add some other touches of other colors as well, so a little bit of pink here and there, a little bit of cadmium orange even for some of the darker shadow areas, because I wanted to make them appear a bit warmer, and I wanted a little bit more of that orangey tone in there, because some of these brownish and pinkish tones that I used appeared a little bit too dull for me. Or maybe the reason why they appear too dull is because of the background of my paper. The background color of the paper always influences the colors to a certain degree. So the color of my sandpaper is gray. It's kind of like medium warm gray, so it's fairly dark and cool in comparison to the colors that I want to achieve. So I wanted to create slightly warmer colors and of course considerably lighter colors, lighter tones. That's why I'm going to have to apply multiple layers of these colors in order to cover that background as much as possible. Now I can use blending tools to spread the pigment around, for example brushes and tortillons and blending stumps and things like that, but the thing is that when I use those blending tools, that also tends to spread the material and reveal a little bit, at least a little bit of that background color, so everything appears just a little bit more grayish and duller. So if I want to make sure that the color that I'm trying to achieve is fuller, more saturated and closer to what I originally intended, I often have to go back after the blending process. I have to go back in and add a few more layers on top of that. And the good thing about this surface, the sanded textured surface, is that it allows you to add multiple layers. I can just add layer upon layer on top of one another. And the other obvious advantage, and probably the biggest advantage of this surface, is that you can work from dark to light, adding lighter colors on top of the darker ones, which is a huge advantage because it's just a more natural way to work, and it also allows you to create some details and effects that you otherwise wouldn't be able to create. Now this is not a particularly detailed drawing, a particularly detailed subject, but the fact that you can work from dark to light always helps. I tend to use that when I draw skin, often when I draw hair and things like that, but obviously the ability to work from dark to light is usually by far the most useful when doing things like wildlife, furry animals and things like that, because then you can put a lot of these fine lighter details on top of the darker areas you've previously shaded. So moving on to the mouth area, just drawing those darker bits first. Now you'll notice that I often use a very dark colored pencil first I often use a black colored pencil for some of the darker shadow areas and just work on top of that with some other colors. That works pretty well on this surface. On regular paper, I don't know if I would recommend this approach. It depends on how you apply your pencils. But here it actually, it's pretty easy, because I can just draw a darker area with a black colored pencil and then just add some touches of color to it using brownish or pinkish or bluish tones on top of that, whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve. In addition to the black colored pencil for some of those darker bits, I also like to use dark sepia. That's the color pencil that I'm using now, and I tend to use it a lot for the darker areas on the face. In addition to that, like I said, for those lighter tones I used the cinnamon, the light beige, and for the darker ones I used some Venetian red, a little bit of ochre, some burnt sienna, and some other browns here and there. The combination of colors I pick for the skin really depends on the overall colors, the overall atmosphere. Here the colors are a little bit cooler, a little bit more grayish. That's because of the background I picked. Now I'm going to put my reference in the description if you want to check it out and see how I adapted to it. So here I'm just drawing some shadow areas around the ear and as well around the lower part of the jaw and chin. I still haven't really figured out at this stage what to do with the background behind the ear, whether I should make it a little bit lighter or darker, but there's no need for me to finish that just yet. I have a lot of work to do on the face here. I decided to do a little bit of blending on this larger portion of the face and the cheek. And of course, like I said, when I blend with a brush, it spreads the color around, but it also makes it a bit more transparent and more grayish in the process, because a bit more of the background color gets through. So now it looks kind of messy, and I'm going to have to work on top of that patiently, adding a few layers of the same colors that I used on the left side of the face, except that this right side of the face is going to appear a little bit darker. That's the shadow side of the face. The cheekbones, of course, are sticking out. They will be a little bit lighter, but this cheek area, which is facing away from the light source, is going to be in the shadow. That's going to be a little bit darker. If the colors are a little bit too cool, I can just add a bit of cadmium orange, maybe even a touch of cadmium red here and there, just a few warmer colors here and there. He was a good looking guy with a really strong jaw and kind of cheerful looking eyes, cheerful face with a lot of these wrinkles around the corners of the eyes, so I tried to capture those, and I used quite a range of value there, as you will see. I put in even some black colored pencil in some of the darkest ones, and then a little bit of brown and burnt sienna, and then I worked around them with my lighter colored pencils. For some of the lightest parts of the face, I even added a little bit of ivory colored pencil on top of the light beige for the lightest highlights, because I wanted to increase the range of value. Of course, I can't overdo it with it, because then the face would appear overlit, but as long as I use it sparingly on top of some of the other skin colors, it should look fine. I'm just adjusting the shape of the teeth right now. They still need a little bit of shading, and the shape of the mouth needs to be corrected a little bit because it doesn't really look like his mouth, but it's going to be adjusted. I'm going to make some changes to it. not everything can be achieved all at once. Alright, so I'm doing a bit more shading on the lower lip here and around the side of the mouth, just to get those dimples and those wrinkles around the mouth to look right. And also every now and then I keep adding a few touches of warmer colors, just to make sure that I'm closer to the actual skin color when my skin tone starts to appear a little bit too cool and grayish. So, like I said, he mostly played in musicals. Those are very old movies. I have actually watched a few of them. You can rarely see them on TV nowadays. Maybe if you have a channel that plays some of these old classics. But I can't really tell you at which point he was most popular. Probably 60s. I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly. This is a series of commission portraits, and it's not my choice of subjects, but I always try to adapt and try to make the most out of every one of those portraits, and I try to adjust the reference photos to my liking. Just adding a bit more shadow under that jaw area, because he had a very nice jawline and a massive neck too. So just doing a little bit more work on the ear as well. I initially covered it with some darker colors because I knew that it was going to be in the shadow, but some part of that ear are kind of sticking out and catching a little bit more light from the light source, so now I'm moving in with some lighter tones and just adding a few details and wrinkles here and there, mostly wrapping things up with the face. So after that I'm going to do a little bit of work on the neck, starting with some lighter tones on the left side, which is my light side, and then some darker brownish colors on the right side, the shadow side. I also added a few touches of that lighter color around that side parting to make that a little bit more noticeable. And now I'm doing a bit more shading on the neck and adding a few of these larger folds and trying to define some of the neck muscles, basically putting down some finishing touches on the head and neck part of the drawing before I move on with the shirt and the clothes, which is going to be a little bit simpler. He has a light grayish kind of shirt or t-shirt, I don't know what it is. I'm just going to use a light gray colored pencil. I just have to make sure that I lay down a sufficient amount of it, because it's a lot lighter than the color of my paper. So I need to make sure that I cover it thoroughly. I'm going to do a little bit of blending with a brush. It's going to get a little bit darker and a bit more grayish in the process, but it already looks a bit grayish and kind of off-white, so it doesn't really matter. Here and there I'm going to use a little bit of dark gray, or maybe even a black colored pencil for those folds, like for example around the armpits or on the chest area. But I like to simplify the clothes in most of my portraits. Here, luckily, in this reference, I didn't really have to. simplify much. I didn't have to do many adjustments. So the reference allowed me to focus on the face, to focus on the portrait itself. I'm just making some final adjustments around the eyes and the eyelashes. And now I'm gonna try to finish the rest of the background. The background on the right side is going to be a little bit darker because I want that side to be a little bit darker overall. I'm going to use a bit more black and that dark sepia and a little bit more green, this dark green on that side, and I'm just going to blend that with brushes. Here on the right side of the neck I'm going to use a little bit of this gray because I want that part of the background to be just a little bit lighter so that the darker side of the neck would stand out against it. I'm always trying to create that contrast between the main subject and the background, so if I need to make the background a little bit lighter in some places I'm going to do that, and if I need to make it a bit darker to increase the contrast between the main subject and the background, then I'm going to add a bit more value to that part of the background. So it's always a good idea to try to increase that contrast so that the main subject would pop out. I'm just going to drop my signature here in the lower left corner to finish the drawing, or maybe just make a few more final adjustments around the mouth and the teeth. And after that the drawing will be done. Now if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and check out my other videos because I have lots of colored pencil portraits and other drawings as well. Now if you want to see longer videos and more content, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching and bye for now.